Hi everyone, Community Outreach Foreigner here. There's a few reasons why I want to do this video. Mainly, one, to show how hard it is to get help, even after you've asked for help. Just asking can be a big step to take for many. I do have prior experience with this country's psych ward, and it's not particularly good ones. So I haven't actually been in touch with them for a few years, but in this video we're gonna give it another shot, give it an honest try, and I'll demonstrate to you what the process looks like. Sweden is globally known for being a welfare utopia, but it's only when you're forced to actually use those welfare systems that you notice how directly opposite of utopian they are. I feel the people who brag about our social safety nets are the ones who never actually have to use them. What I often see being said rarely reflects mine or many other people's real experiences. So the idea of us as an ideal is a pretty dangerous thing here that needs to be examined. Because as long as we're considered an ideal, there's not really a point in improving things, is there? I want to spread awareness in a constructive way and speak out for many people who can't, because I'm saddened by the many victims of current policies who aren't getting the help we're supposed to be entitled to. I feel for you. Few examples here. My daughter killed herself. Why doesn't anyone care? This is a heartbreaking article about parents who fought for 4 years to get their daughter adequate care, yet she just got bounced around with bureaucracy. Another example, after 6 months of aimless pending between mental care and primary care, he took his own life. Every day in Sweden, a senior citizen kills themselves. Every week in Sweden, a teenager kills themselves. Often, it's due to direct failure from our welfare agencies. For example, after numerous rejections from Försäkringskassan, meaning the insurance board, meaning the Swedish social safety net, a 20-year-old killed themselves because they refused her help, because they made her fight for the right to even get basic treatment and money to pay the rent with. Because Sweden treats sick people like animals. And given the doctors are outright criticizing our mental health ward for an obscene silence culture, I feel like maybe it's time for someone to shine a light to what's going on the inside of the system. Record amounts of Swedes are now on antidepressants, more than ever before, and these pills often increase the risk for suicidal tendencies amongst young people struggling. So maybe there's a need for an organic perspective to all of this. Also, I want to let my fanbase understand why it sometimes goes weeks, even months, without me uploading a new video. It's not laziness, as my work ethic consists of trademark autistic ferocity. I've explained the creation process before. I work very hard. I literally have 1,000 scripts accumulated on my PC. Work ethic is not the problem. My intended upload schedule is once a week, every other video on every other channel. Sometimes you'll notice me violating my own policy though, because my head crashes. I've been struggling with various mental disorders for a little more than 10 years now. That's probably how long I've been physically unable to be happy. I don't know if you've ever looked at brain scans of mentally ill people, but this is what a normal brain looks like. And this is what I can relate to. Overactive electric input ruining my life, having little to do with nonsense like hitting the gym. I've kept that up for months with no difference to my well-being. If your problems are solved just by hitting the gym, then you're probably not a member in the exclusive elite of Club Fucked Up. People like me will experience a beautiful sunny day and think of the sun as an insult. I am not surprised by suicides peaking around spring, because light is a mockful reminder of what you can never have in your own life. I got diagnosed with Asperger's pretty late in life, somewhere in my early 20s, and there's a somewhat unique problem with being one of those high-functioning autists that you hear about. Namely that people don't take you seriously. I've seen this described so many times. When you tell people that you're autistic, some of them will start to speak slower, as if you're retarded. Talk to different autists and you'll often find workplace anecdotes along the lines of, one guy started talking about me in the third person right in front of me. Like, "Oh, John did a good thing today." They somehow manage to be disgustingly condescending and considerate at the same time. But it's fake considerate. If you actually knew anything about the spectrum, you wouldn't act like that. And if you didn't know but wanted to learn, you would ask questions, or just even do a basic Google. You wouldn't assume that someone is retarded just because they don't learn the same way as you do. That's not consideration, that's virtue signaling. And I've noticed something similar with parts of my audience. Whenever I've mentioned it passing by, there's a reaction of almost offended surprise. Just because I'm good at expressing myself, people will automatically assume that I have zero problems in life related to the social, workplace, well-being, etc. Just because you're verbally gifted, they assume you're gifted in all other avenues of life as well. And that pisses me off, primarily for two reasons. Number one, it ignores how much hard work this is, and it sure wouldn't hurt having more patrons. I'm basically doing 4 jobs at once here. I'm a writer, as well as a researching journalist, actor, and video editor. What you are seeing here is my performance. Which brings us to number 2. This is a widespread issue. Even outside myself, I've noticed how language alone will dictate the human experience. Just because you talk smart and act nice, people will think you are. And a lot of politicians exploit that. A lot of rich people exploit that. They get your trust, your confidence, your votes, and then eventually your disappointments. Learning to separate media from person, I think, would collectively improve the way we think about politics and power. It would also teach people not to get bummed out from someone else's Facebook posts whenever they go on a vacation. You do not know someone just because you see their performance. And the value of separating words and actions shines through in the insight that you don't actually know much about anyone. To truly learn, you gotta give it time, not just go off of impressions that you get on impulse. Not engage in witch hunts on Twitter. Now, I'm a high school dropout with more experience of this country's mental ward than its labor market. It's for valid reasons that I don't feel like getting too detailed about, so let me just summarize it by quoting a modern philosopher. Whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger. Because I have a different brain structure and a personality disorder or two, it can be considered more vulnerable, meaning it becomes easier for me to tack on other disorders as well. This is known as comorbidity, and it is quite common. So in addition to the stuff I've told you about, I have depression, compulsive OCD, and generalized anxiety disorder. These are naturally prone side effects to my kind of psyche, but it gets exhausting, since I haven't been able to be happy in 10 years' time. Whenever I do feel happy, there's a layer of anxiety and paranoia over the sensation, because that's what GAD means, chronic anxiety. It messes with you in very insidious ways, and pretty much removes your ability to choose your thoughts. I have the worst possible scenarios constantly pushed into my consciousness at all times, and it's so vivid. It's not a passing idea, never is. It's always an extremely vulgar obsession that's impossible to ignore. I will literally sit for 5 hours, 8 hours, and have something dwelling in my head, always protruding over what I'm experiencing, before it goes away and something else pops up. I need help. A lot of it. Because this isn't something I know how to manage on my own. And so we're gonna start off with the first step, establishing a contact. But before that, remember I upload every other week on every other channel, and make sure to click the notification bell along with all notifications. Unless you do this, YouTube will choose what uploads to notify you about based on cleanliness. not the best system. And make sure to support me on Patreon or Subscribestar if you like my work. Just $1 a month makes a big difference for me, as small, stable sums add up to a nice salary long term. It helps me keep doing this, and I'd also like to recommend to bookmark my website for those who don't know about it. Now let's go get some of that social safety net.
Okej, hur får jag en remiss? Okej, för det jag har är ju flera psykiska störningar, så det är ganska uppenbart för mig att jag behöver någon att prata med på psyk då. Men det är alltså den vägen jag måste gå formellt helt enkelt. Då förstår jag. Tack så mycket, jag ska göra det. Yeah, it's a doctor thing. Like I suspected, it's a doctor thing.
Okay. So you have to call someone else now? You know what that means?
I guess I should record it. I mean, in case. So just to summarize what this nice lady just said, formally I have to go to a hospital first and meet a doctor and get an assessment and then get a formal written note sending me to the loony bin where I can talk to someone. So let's go! Welcome to a fucking machine. This is the future. So I just called them to be told that I can't talk to anyone. They're gonna call me back. So it's a very, it's a very feminine way of dealing with issues in this country. Just making me feel like I have to work for it.
They'll be ready to talk on their own time.
Jag pratade med förra gången så att hon skulle koppla mig direkt till psykosociala teamet oavsett tid. Att jag kunde ringa igen. Gärna.
Okay, so this nice lady informed me that we are still technically in the whole get back to you phase. She's not feeling quite ready yet, but at least now I can look forward to getting a call tomorrow. Turns out it's the psychosocial team I need to get in touch with more specifically, not the general psych ward who I called first, who then told me that I should call the hospital so I can get a doctor to prescribe me to the psych ward, when it really turns out it's the psych department of the public hospital you start with. And forgive me for being an immigrant, but I don't really know the difference here. It seems like an in-between. I don't really know what's in and out. We kind of have a problem with that. So just, I'm not going to pretend to understand this Terry Gilliam level of bureaucracy. That's just, the overall point here is that in socialist Sweden, psych ward call you.
9:15 så. Tack så mycket.
This is a disgustingly looking, real looking old man. Good God. Look at that fucking dick. Why is there a dick there? He wrote me a prescription and yeah, that's what I needed. So now I'm basically waiting to get in touch with the psych ward, which I called first of all.
Du har kommit till sjukvården. Vi har sökt dig. Om vi fortfarande behöver få kontakt med dig kommer vi att ringa upp dig igen.
Well, gee, thanks a lot. So I had to travel to an hour for a different city to meet a psychologist that's gonna write me a prescription. So just to sum it up in case Swedish bureaucracy gets confusing, I met the counselor last week who wrote me a prescription, which made me really happy because I thought I was gonna see a shrink. Instead, I end up being sent to the prescription unit to see a shrink that's gonna write me a prescription so that the place I just spent an hour traveling away from will hopefully make an assessment and then give me a shrink. So essentially, this socialist utopia healthcare system works like an exhibit meme.
Yo, dog, I hooked you up with a prescription for a prescription so you can go to the prescription unit and get your prescription, and then maybe we can help you out.
All I did this meeting was repeat everything I said last time, essentially. So we're still stuck in the whole she's gonna get back to me phase. Still waiting for her to figure out her feelings so she can get back to me and decide if I'm worthy enough to be in a relationship with the mental health care as a tax-paying citizen. Ooh, this really rustled my jimmies, you know. I don't like traveling, so why send a guy who... You know this guy is autistic, so why the fuck would you send him on a trip for no reason?
What the I finally met a shrink today, and he looks like Mel Brooks. So that's a good sign. I look forward to seeing if we match up chemistry-wise, and I'll keep you posted. Also, I realized that it took me this long to get into the system. I started somewhere in September, and I have a verified diagnosis, which makes things speedier in the process. I don't want to imagine how slow and tedious it can be if you don't. So, guess what, guys? It turns out that socialism just means tons of bureaucracy, not actually taking care of people. First of all, the shrink I was handed was rather nice. An older man with experience and education, and it feels kind of shit that he couldn't help me. It took me months to get a shrink, and when I finally do, we get to see each other for like 3 to 4 months, then soon reach the conclusion he's not qualified enough, even though he's the most educated one they have, and like 50 years old. Doesn't feel good when the guy basically goes, yeah, I went to uni, but you're fucked, son. I don't feel like I'm asking for all that much. All I'm asking you to do here is help me with the goatsy-sized gaping abyss up here and just put a cork in it. If you can't do that, then why am I paying taxes? It's not that the guy wasn't nice. He was actually very caring, interested, and intelligent enough to understand how I may differ from the usual client. After extensive talks, we both concluded the same thing. I was like, I can't have a mere simple counselor with basic education. And he was like, I am well educated, but not in a specific orientation that meets your needs, since there's so many schools of thought. And out of respect for me, he didn't make a secret of the fact that most people seeking help are basically just suffering mom issues. You know, housewife shit, low-level anxiety disorders, or just loneliness, really. So a lot of the time, people are just looking to vent and be understood for who they are. Which in a way speaks on the utopian society we've built here, where company suddenly becomes currency. And then those people who don't need very complex treatment become positive anecdotes praising our mental health system, telling the more severe cases that our Sweden image is beautiful, and if you can't get help, then it's probably just your own fault. I've seen that so many times, it just makes me sick. Well, I've been helped, so the system couldn't possibly be in error here. Really? You've been helped? Well, good for you. Case in point, here's an article called My Grandfather Asked for Help, but then he chose death. The article is about how this guy's granddad struggled with suicidal tendencies and wasn't taken seriously by his doctor. After being told to come back when it's worse, he decided to end it. Fast forward 30 or 40 years, and things are supposedly way different now. It's talked about more. It's a different climate. Author talks about his own struggles with panic attacks connected to his performance anxiety. How every day he felt forced to wear a happy mask. Locked in his head with ugly feelings he doesn't understand. And he writes, I didn't have any thoughts of suicide, But maybe my grandpa didn't either when he was young. Maybe I was carrying a seed that was eventually gonna kill me, just like it killed my grandfather. That fear eventually made me seek out help in January of 2015. It took 2 months to get to see someone, but then I was taken seriously. I met a psychologist who felt I should tell my family about how I've been feeling. So you hadn't already done that? See, this is what I mean. It's the bare minimum requirements. As a shrink, you're often just working with people who need to be told to be themselves to the fullest extent and just truly own their feelings. In the article, he even mentions how most people that contact him, panic attacks, goody two-shoes syndrome, depression, etc., work like that. Most people don't act like an open book. They got all kind of hang-ups, all kinds of shame, so to them it's a huge deal just to find someone who's willing to listen. But I have amazing friends and family, loved ones who are truly supportive, and they're there for me and they're willing to listen. And it does absolutely jack shit, because that's all normal people can do. Understanding doesn't translate into a palatable plan of action to change behavioral patterns and the many challenges that arise along the way. If they were experts on the human mind like that, then everyone I know would be rich by now, which I wouldn't mind. But it's just not the case. I don't suffer from loneliness, I suffer from biology. I'm not constipated. I don't have a problem accessing my feelings, being vulnerable, describing exactly everything that's going on, yada yada yada. What I'm lacking is the practical, deep-seated knowledge as to how you change behavior and patterns, which is trickier when your problem is your fundamental brain structure. It becomes a sludgier process. And so I really appreciate the author for making the following point. Quote, "The first thing I told my therapist was, I shouldn't be here. I needed help, but I could see what other kinds of people were sitting in the waiting room. I didn't need the same help as them." In grandfather's time, they would rather send nobody at all to psychiatry, but now they would rather send too many, out of the fear that if a kid kills themselves, it's gonna be labeled as your fault. He further explains that even if the intention might be good, this has the consequence that, to use a metaphor, even those with a cold are sent to the emergency unit. Instead of helping those with a cold quickly, this just creates long pile-ups, long lines, affecting those with the most severe illnesses. Those with a mere cold are standing in line for care that they don't actually need, while those with severe illnesses don't have the energy to seek care since the road there becomes so tricky and tangly. This problem, in his opinion, can be handled in two different ways, where one doesn't have to exclude the other. Number one, give more money to or effectivize psychiatry so they can work these long lineups away. And two is help those with easier difficulties in different ways so that psychiatry can focus on the most severe cases. And I think his ideas actually sound good. Something very typical that's often described by many is precisely the long waiting times, as well as being bounced around a lot to different people. So either people come across a competent shrink and are forced to change to someone new in the middle of treatment due to resource deficit, or there's the issue of personal chemistry. You need help now, quickly, yet you wait months, and when you finally get to talk to someone, you just don't fit. You think about what human beings work like. It's not like you can open up to just about anyone, and it's not like everyone gives equally good responses. Those kinds of things can also be very subjective. And other times, it's only after a few months you realize, well, it started out good, but now we're not really getting anywhere and I overstated our chemistry. Or you just notice someone's not as professional as you first thought. That can happen too. So there's a natural complexity to finding the right person, made even worse by slug bureaucracy and the resource deficit that almost seems intentional, because why give a shit about people who are too fragile to want to speak up for themselves? It's not like they're an important voting base for a politician anyway. A politician even benefits more by importing voting cattle and having people who can't work and pay taxes kill themselves. The deeper underlying problem with being bounced around like this is that it ends up costing society way more in the long term, because there is something called re-traumatization. Look it up. There's also a separate phenomenon based on that called re-traumatization in therapy. Being sent around to different people constantly also means starting over constantly with a new person who wants to know what's troubling you, and they're too damn lazy to read your journal, or they're just looking for some kind of depth, so you end up having to explain the same things over and over and over and over again from the top to different people, and this inadvertently becomes the same thing as obsessing over it. It's the behavior of obsession rather than the intention. This over-focus magnifies your problems, making them bigger than they actually are, because it's effectively the same as dwelling. Or, as in Andy's case here, you get 1 hour with a shrink, 50 minutes is spent dwelling, the last 10 minutes are the only piece that's spent on solving and actually productive, before it's time to say goodbye and make a new appointment. So that's a problem that's described by a lot of people. What pisses me off though is that I'm a pretty smart guy, so they end up learning more than me. I noticed them sitting there going, "Oh, well, that's a very interesting perspective. I've never thought of it like that before." I'm just like, well, tell me something. Something that I don't already know. I'm the one who's supposed to be getting perspective here. A lot of shrinks are just people who read a textbook. And so they might have knowledge, but not necessarily knowledge on how to apply that knowledge. There's a great channel called Philip Solo TV. Check it out, it's a favorite of mine. He does a lot of fun, weird stuff, and the occasional mental health stuff.
So a variety of different things happen, but the simplest version is that your stress hormones go up. Mm-hmm. And the most common stress hormone that we're aware of is called cortisol. Mm-hmm. Why does that matter? Well, if your cortisol goes up, there's a direct correlation with your potential for addiction. Cortisol goes higher, depression goes higher. Cortisol goes higher, anxiety goes higher. Cortisol goes higher, OCD, PTSD, da-da-da-da-da. All of these things go through the roof, direct correlation. Guess what? We get literally biochemically addicted to those stress hormones. Our rational brain would go, that's the last thing I want. But our body is addicted to them. That means our body wants them. Now what's it going to do? It's going to think about things that lead to more cortisol, that lead to more stressful thoughts, so that I can get more cortisol that I'm addicted to.
Addicted to being stressed out.
Addicted to being stressed out, addicted to chaos, addicted to drama, addicted to fear, addicted to disconnection. Mm-hmm. All the things that drive cortisol. So there's two things.
I've never seen anyone talk about it like that before, but it makes a lot of sense. What's experienced as a mental disorder actually becomes a physical addiction to pain and misery that exists irrelevantly of your hopes, dreams, and ideals. You know deep down what the healthy thing to do is, but a lot of the time it's like you can't do it because you've been poisoned. Your body makes it feel like that's the wrong thing to do, not the right thing to do. And it gets so confusing. And it changes you. It makes you sicker, darker, more sadistic. It changes your idea of happiness to the point where you'll laugh at snuff. Because all you ever know is suffering, and all you ever want is to find a way to be happy. Ultimately, your brain is gonna find messed up paths to achieve that, and thus dark humor is born. Thus, we all become 4chan. And it's scary to notice how humans can adapt to really just anything. It becomes your new norm. You get comfortable. You forget what used to exist. You forget what used to exist in you. Without even realizing it, you sometimes forget to struggle. And there's nobody around to remind you of the right path. I mean, in a way, you have to be insane to even feel hope to begin with. You have to use your unhinged nature to redirect your insanity into something that works for you. You have to be crazy enough to explore and try anything, because otherwise you'll just settle into a pattern of decay. Since it makes you uncomfortable to change, you gotta experiment with your comfort zone. And that's a very painful thing to do. Experimenting with comfort zones is especially important if your problem is to even talk to anyone about it to begin with, because it kind of indicates you have a problem taking up space. Kind of indicates you have a problem with self-empathy. I think back to an interview I did with a doctor who complained about Sweden's health system being over-bureaucratic. The interview was about corona, but it also touched upon the general healthcare crisis that's existed in this country for many years. One root cause, according to this long-time practitioner, is that health professionals in general are expected to go off of a mold and official guidelines instead of using their expertise for the specific individual situation. And it certainly explains why shrinks in this country are shit. Someone might actually be great, but you're never gonna find out about it because they'll be going after the guidelines. Far too often they will just sit there like a moron and expect you to do the talking. If they ask any questions, they're just designed to get you to keep talking instead of getting valuable, palatable advice. They're even instructed during their educations not to try and connect too much with the patient because that would be over-emotional. But in a North Germanic country where people already act like robots, that takes on a completely incompetent manifestation. I agree that being objective and not over-connecting is good, but instead, in practice, you just get zero connecting and people thinking of patients as objects. Slap on a diagnosis, then feed them pills. It's like a machine. They become robots, and not even the effective kind. Every 6 hours, someone commits suicide in Sweden. Since the 80s, mental illness amongst young people has increased a lot. Sweden's way of handling this is peculiar to say the least. 2010, the Royal Science Academy arranged a conference to figure out why this development is happening. Leading experts are gathered to answer the question. 3 days later, they conclude that they have no idea. And so the government invests 300 million tax crowns into a research project to find out. This was in 2011. 6 years later, they look at the results and repeat, we have no idea. The conclusion of the project is 0 ideas for preventative measures and treatments. The chairman of the expert group wanted to go out in the media with criticisms, but the Swedish government agencies that funded this project said no, absolutely not. So the disastrous results never even reached journalists, so that a social conversation could be had. Until now, 9 years later, when one article is published. It's first now that I'm hearing of this tax waste project because Swedish agencies care more about their pretty reputation as a utopia than the actual reality of the public's well-being. You might have noticed this when we were mass murdering old people with corona. This is a general pattern that you see absolutely everywhere in this country, so I guess it's no surprise that I am where I am. And a couple of years later, they invest 137 tax million into another project that's pretty much the exact same. Because Swedish people are dumb enough to think you can approach this problem like an engineer rather than a fellow man. The European Germanic stereotype is so palatable here. But at least I'm not alone. Quote, Sweden's goal is that 9 out of 10 teenagers seeking mental care are to be helped within a month. During 2019, only 1 county managed to achieve that. The rest of Sweden had people waiting for months, sometimes up to half a year, before getting their first assessment. I guess that's natural when you overload the country with a certain cough, overpopulation policy that seeps resources. So why couldn't the utmost experts answer this? Well, one of the agency assholes said that he still sees a value in this tax waste project because at least it showed where the answer doesn't lie. Quote, I guess you're gonna have to think more anthropologically or social science-esque to find the cause. For example, what does the internet mean? What does social media mean? Our researchers were more focused on the psychiatric part. End of quote. So, 300 million right into a trash can, because even the most well-knowledgeable scientists and experts can be complete morons. They know just as much about this as everyone else, which is little. Wow! I could have told you all of that without you having to spend 300 million of our taxes on it. Why didn't you just ask me? Or anyone you're researching about, for that matter? And notice the wording psychiatry. Now, that's the art of treating mental illness with medicine, whereas psychology is more commonly understood as treating it through understanding and conversation. When you look at the increase in mental illness, it's not that more people are becoming bipolar and schizophrenic. It's that more people are experiencing mental unwell. Situational disorders rather than genetic ones. To think that you can do a project like this without even knowing the difference between the kind of illness you get from your environment and the kind of illness you're prone to genetically with your personality and your brain. Like, anyone can become depressed or acquire anxiety disorder as a reaction to something that happens in life. But not everyone can go and become autistic as a reaction to something that happens in life. I really feel like making a joke about tantrum feminism here, but I'm pinching myself. This is serious. The point is, of course this social perspective is more relevant. We're not talking about some weird massive increase in mass genetic mutation suddenly taking place. We're talking about people reacting to their environment. To then only base your research on psychiatry, biology, medicine is futile. And if you assume based on anthropology, there's some pretty obvious reasons. For example, they made school in Sweden complete garbage, everything is much more about grades now, and they changed the system so it's much harder to get an A, even if you're doing the exact same work, the exact same effort as before. Essentially, the best student in class will no longer get an A just for not getting one little detail right. So a lot of people are experiencing panic attacks, anxiety disorders, depression, and so on, just from the absurdly unrealistic high standards that they're facing with achievements. Success complex is very common and a protruding factor amongst many seeking help. And that achievement complex has been made even worse with the growth of the internet and social media, where you're subconsciously taught to always compare with others. Just look at how popular anal bleaching has become all of a sudden, all thanks to social media and people like Kim Kardashian. And then you got the Swedish culture, which is just one big achievement complex. They love being shallow here. Nothing gets them off more. Don't stand out, don't be weird, don't be different, don't have uncomfortable conversations, don't be negative, just pay taxes. Yeah, that's not gonna make anyone healthier either. All of this combined becomes the ultimate criticism of society. And that's not really something that's easy for politicians to address, nor even desirable. You look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How applicable is this to Sweden? In a society based on political correctness, where it takes absolutely nothing to stand out, and standing out is considered bad, how could you possibly have self-actualization, belonging, or esteem? It's hard to just even express your opinions in this country, so how can you express your personality? How many can seriously say that they are currently at the top 3 layers of this pyramid? And how does one have a sense of status, respect, and self-esteem when they're told their gender makes them a rapist? It's not really rocket science. Anyway, I haven't seen my shrink since spring. What ended up happening was that he did make an effort, he made a good effort, and he managed to hook me up with some different clinic in a nearby city, but that's around the same time that Corona broke out, so not really the best time for consistent public commuting with mass transport. And also, meh. All we did was talk shit that I know anyway. And the reason I'm releasing this video first now is professional procrastinating. I always have about 10 projects going at a time. I have 5 books planned. Tons of interviews planned. I've been wanting to do that for years. Finally got started our interview series, and yeah, it's great. I have to admit, I was real angry for a while, and I felt very unstable at times. But overall, I have to say I'm actually doing much better now than I did before. Key concepts that I've been studying in depth are relaxation, visualization, and softening myself up, as well as patience and acceptance as more deeper philosophies, because those are important qualities when it takes about 2 months to change a habit, and you're gonna need it if you got a lot of bad habits. Learning that this is the cutoff mark for habit change actually helped a lot, because it's easy to panic in case you feel like you're not progressing enough one day. And trying to be okay living with constant pain makes you very impatient and sometimes confused as to whether or not your efforts are even paying off. Motivation becomes something you struggle with greatly. But the better you get at adjusting to discomfort, the more the pain actually subsides long term, as your effort translates into developing other seemingly unrelated mental mechanisms leading into behavioral patterns. I think it's important to practice ways of removing the stick up your ass. Really learning about acceptance rather than getting hooked up on what things should be like. Whether it's how your life should have turned out, how a situation should have went, or what someone should be acting like. I've been working with having more realistic expectations instead of being an anal perfectionist, and stepping outside of my comfort zone. Since living in the moment makes me uncomfortable, I've been practicing ways to do precisely that. And all of these things I've found greater help with through YouTube than Swedish psychiatry. There are some really great channels out there, summarize a lot of different research and convey it into palatable advice. I've been getting into motivation psychology as well, since you need that when you have a spazzy brain. So to summarize, it's going slow but uphill. And that's another thing I've been practicing that's really important. Focusing on your efforts rather than current results. Looking at the trajectory rather than where you're currently at. And before you know it, some of your older bad habits just aren't there anymore. And that's where visualization comes into play for me, because there really is a thing to that whole self-fulfilling prophecies thing. It's about recalibrating your focus into positive goals rather than getting stuck dwelling on all the negative things that you don't want. So to me, happiness seems more achievable by aiming to be content, because then it tends to manifest itself indirectly. If you aim to be happy, it builds expectations in a strange way, and you end up just focusing on why you never can. It's like trying to score a chick. You're not gonna get very good results being desperate for it. It's better to just kind of try and chill out instead. It's off to negging. You gotta neg life. Just like the chaotic, unforgiving porno slut that she is. Anyway, this is the first time I'm doing a video like this, so please leave a comment with your feedback. What aspects could I highlight more? What questions could I raise? What's something you would want to see me talk more about? Please leave a comment with your thoughts. I look forward to going over your feedback. And please try not to kill yourself. If you're watching this and you're struggling, go look up what people who survived it have to say. Everyone who survived a genuine attempt always talks about how their entire being regretted it at the very last second. Their intuition is telling them to feel hope because there is reason to feel hope. You're just not gonna get a lot of hope through a socialist politician. Thank you for watching. If you like my channel and want to support me, there's Patreon and Subscribestar, as well as word of mouth. When you're already shadow banned, it helps a lot to have people share your videos manually and generally advertise you. Those are my recommendations for those who want to support this channel, and I'll see you in the future.